You've spelunked into the Matt Cave. Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Matt Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. Happy New Year. We're into 2025. And like I promised, we're going to do the year in reviews for each school. And I'm going to dedicate one episode each. And we're going to start with Utah State. Then next week it'll be Utah. And then after that, it will be BYU, going in reverse alphabetical order. And then if there is big news in the state of Utah, I will dedicate parts of these episodes to those stories. But for this week, there isn't anything humongous. No big trades for the Jazz or the club. Real Salt Lake hasn't done anything. And there haven't been any major bombshells when it comes to the coaching staffs at BYU and Utah State that won't be covered already in these reviews. So obviously, Utah State, Utah, huge coaching staff bombshells. BYU is wisely standing pat. And so that's how that's going to break down. Thank you all so much for being here. As always, rate, review, like, comment, subscribe, wherever it is, however you're listening. I appreciate you being here. And like I say every week, I'm a broken record. I do want to do this every day. I want to do this for a living. So I need your help to get there. And guess what? Next month, it will be 5 years of me doing this show weekly. Wow. 5 years. That's awesome. Thank you all just for listening to me ramble on about what I'm passionate about, which is sports and video games. I do know that the video game side of things has been lacking here recently. I promise I will do better. And I know I haven't been streaming over on twitch.tv/MattsCave, MATTS Cave. That will change as well this year. I just wanted to give myself a break at the end of last year. So that will all change. I promise all of you gamers, I have not forgotten about you because I am a gamer myself. I did dedicate an episode, a big chunk of one, to the Game Awards. So go ahead and listen to that one and let me know what you think. But that is the goal. There are other goals this year for this podcast. There might be video, depending on what happens. I got a new big boy job, so we'll see how busy I am with that. But I promise you, I am doing what I can to give you the best show I can. And I appreciate you being here. 5 years next month. That's crazy. All right, so that pretty much does it for housekeeping. I am on Facebook, the Matt Cave Podcast. That's my only social media. And let's just dive into it. You can also find me on YouTube. I am on YouTube. Just look up the Matt Cave Podcast. You'll find me. But anyway, let's get on with it. So Utah State, the season started very acrimoniously. It was not a good look for the school. It wasn't a good look for the state. It wasn't a good look for anybody. I'm not going to get into any of it. There was a bunch of investigations going on. There's a bunch of lawsuits going on right now surrounding what happened with former head coach Blake Anderson. It was a mess. And that was the backdrop going into the season. And it happened almost a couple of weeks before the season kicked off. So Utah State had a new interim head coach in Nate Dreiling, and they just had to play ball. That's really what they came in up against. So they started off the season against Robert Morris Division II school, or as we call them now, FCS schools, Football Championship Subdivision, if you want to sound smart. And they won 36-14, expected, right? Anytime you schedule one of these schools on for your season to kick it off, it's a warm-up. Everybody does it. Even Alabama does it. Only theirs is later in the season. But that's why they're there. So then they move on to USC. That's the big one to kick off the season. At the time, USC was ranked number 13 in the country. And Utah State was still scrambling to find an identity with their interim head coach, and it was just an ugly game. 48-0 was a loss. Spencer Petras was benched. It wasn't a good look. They lost their starting running back to a season-ending injury, so then they had to put Faison in there, and we are where we are. And that starting running back, by the way, was the guy I told you to look out for, Robert Briggs Jr. He was the guy that I thought was going to have a huge season, and he started off on fire. But then he got injured, so that's what happened there. Then they moved on. They went home for the game against Utah. Big brother, little brother, as it's pretty much known. I know Aggie fans don't like that being the case, but it is the case. Utah's big brother, Utah State's little brother. That's just how it is. And Utah State put up a fight. It was actually a really close game. It was Zach Wilson's, I believe, first start. And it was a close game throughout most of it. Utah got a couple of touchdowns late to seal the deal, but Utah State put up a good fight. And I thought that could have been sort of like a turnaround point for the Aggies. Maybe they found an identity with Bryson Barnes. They started figuring out, they've got some players, right? They got Roswell Faison started to pop off. Jalen Royals and Kyrese White had a good game. They were doing some stuff. Ike Larson was reminding everybody why he's going to be an NFL defensive back. But then they rattled off 4 straight losses, a really bad one to a Temple team and school that is reconsidering if they're going to be having a football program moving forward. They lost that one convincingly. Yes, it was in Philadelphia at the time, but it's still a bad loss. Then they got blown out by Boise State. Nobody was surprised by that. It was in Boise. Then they lost to UNLV, and Utah State put up some points against pretty much everybody this year. They only got shut down, once, and that was against USC. So the offense was humming pretty much the entire season. So they put up 34 against UNLV in a loss at home. They put up 45 against their now head coach, Bronco Mendenhall, who's supposed to be a defensive genius. And they lost that one 50-45 in a barn burner of a game. That one was really fun to watch if you're a neutral observer like myself. It was a late night game. BYU and Utah were done with their games. I was watching that one because I couldn't get to sleep. It was fun. It was fun. Then they won their second game of the season. They went up to Laramie and beat a very bad Wyoming team. Wyoming finished next to last in the Mountain West Conference at 3-9. Utah State eked out a victory there. Then they faced off against Washington State. Not quite the Cougars the Aggies fans wanted to face, but that's what they got. They lost to then ranked number 21 in the nation, Washington State, 49-28. The defense just couldn't get people off the field. And then they put it all together in a very impressive win against Hawaii, who at the time was fighting for bowl eligibility. And there is something in college football called the Hawaii rule, where Hawaii gets to play 13 games, but they still only have to clear the 6-win bar to be able to be qualified for bowl season. And so at the time, Hawaii was still fighting for that. And so it was a meaningful game for both schools because Utah State was as well. They were fighting for bowl eligibility. But they went on. They faced San Diego State at home. San Diego State usually is a very good team. Past couple of seasons, though, not so much. San Diego State finished tied for second to last in the Mountain West with a 2-5 overall conference record and a 3-9 record overall, just like Wyoming. They won that one 41-20. And against Colorado State, Utah State didn't really have bowl eligibility to play for, but they could have kept Colorado State out of the Mountain West Conference Championship, like for sure. And they put up one heck of a fight. 42-37 was the loss on that one. And so overall, Utah State went 3-4 in conference, finished in the middle of the pack, like square in the middle. But their overall record was 4-8, which was better than what I predicted because of the mess they entered the season in. I thought they were going to win 1 or 2 games. I thought the Robert Morris game was their one win of the season. But towards the end of the year, they got 3 more. And if they would have gotten, one more touchdown against Wyoming, 1 more touchdown against Colorado State, they could have gone bowling, which would have been a fantastic victory just for the kids and the coaching staff that remained. Now we hit the offseason, and new coaching staff is coming in. Unfortunately, for the coaching staff that remained after Blake Anderson was removed, they all kind of got pushed out the door. The athletic director, the school president, they wanted a clean slate. They wanted to remove it all and start over. And so they bring in Bronco Mendenhall. Bronco Mendenhall is a decent coach. He's not great. He's not going to get you championships, but he is going to settle the program down, and he is going to have accountability for his players. Not saying that the other coaches at Utah State haven't. I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you what Bronco is going to be bringing in. And I did go over this a few weeks ago when they announced the hire of Bronco from New Mexico. Now, with the new coaching staff coming in, a lot of transfers going out. That's just the reality of college football today. But let's talk about the coaching staff a little bit. Bronco Mendenhall, I went into very deep. I did a deep dive into what he did at BYU, what he did at Virginia, and then his one season at New Mexico. Nothing in any of his stops tells you that he is going to get you championships. Nothing. If anything, he'll bring your floor up, but your ceiling is going to remain low. And I think what the leadership at Utah State wanted was somebody who was a disciplinarian bordering on authoritarian when he was at BYU in Virginia. And the requirements at Utah State are not as high as they are at Virginia, and they're not as exclusionary as they are at BYU. So he has a little bit more free reign when it comes to what he can recruit, but I am sure that the leadership up in Logan, Utah, is sitting there going, we need to have a high bar to clear. We're not going to be, beholden to the football program to do anything. We just need a guy in here who is steady. We know what he's going to do day in and day out, and there won't be any player disciplinary issues, because that was kind of the cloud, the malaise that was hanging over the Utah State football program towards the end of the offseason heading into the 2024 season. So they went with the safe hire. That's what Bronco Mendenhall is. He's the safe hire and kind of a home run hire when you think about it. Utah State is leaving the Mountain West, going to the Pac-12, which is basically the Mountain West 2.0. You're just adding in Washington State and Oregon State to the other states. Colorado State, Fresno State, Utah State, Boise State, San Diego State. They're all going. They need one more program to fit the bill for FBS conference. You need 8 teams to be a fully fledged conference, so they're still looking for one more one more school. The Mountain West has added in Northern Illinois as a football-only school, I think starting next season, which is weird. But the Mountain West is now a fully fledged football conference as far as that goes. So it'll be interesting to see what the Pac-12 does trying to get that final football school in there. There have been talks of Gonzaga potentially going to the Mountain West, but Gonzaga has also said they might be going to the Big 12. But that's basketball, right? We're talking football here. I don't know what they can get. I'm sure they've courted the Montana schools. They've looked at the North Dakota, South Dakota schools from the FCS to see if they can bring them up. But if you look at this other conferences that have done that, let's look at Conference USA. That is widely regarded as the worst conference for football in the country. And none of those schools really draw anything. They were just there to be brought up. And I think that's what the Mountain West and the Pac-12 were looking to do, but now it's the Pac-12, right? And I know the Pac-12 does not want to bring up an FCS school because that does not lend itself to Power 5 status, right? So Utah State transitions to a new conference, basically the Mountain West 2.0. Whatever. I mean, the Pac-12 is no longer can label themselves the Conference of Champions. I mean, they barely could do that during the 2010s anyway. So, yeah, so that's kind of the future for the school overall. Bronco Mendenhall will be guiding the ship. He was the coach for when BYU went independent. I need to do an episode talking about how I think that was not very wise to do, but it all worked out in the end, just not with Bronco Mendenhall at the helm. So Bronco Mendenhall is used to transitionary periods. He's used to guiding a school into uncharted waters, and it'll be a little bit more structured than it was when he was an independent. The offensive coordinator is Kevin McGivern. He is brought in from San Jose State, who had a decent season, 7-6 overall, 3-4 in conference. The offense that he had, his quarterback threw for over 2,500 yards. They passed for 321 per game, which was 5th in the nation. And that is coming to a school in Utah State who finished with 269 passing yards per game, which was 21st in the country. So when I get to the review of the overall units here in a little bit, I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that. But I think that's a pretty sneaky good hire for Bronco Mendenhall. It's not a household name. You'll never get a household name when it comes to being the Utah State or any Mountain West school, really. But it's a guy who seems to know. He was the passing game coordinator. He was the wide receivers coach as well. So he's not the quarterback guru. But his team was able to throw the ball around a lot. Now, the defensive coordinator is Nick Howell. Nick Howell has been an acolyte of Bronco Mendenhall since Bronco's time at BYU. I believe Nick Howell was a graduate assistant, and he's worked his way up to become the defensive coordinator for Bronco at New Mexico, and now he's brought him along to Utah State. Same thing with Brett Arkelian. He's going to be the special teams coordinator, and Bronco brought Brett along from New Mexico. So that's your new coaching staff. And overall, I mean, first season might be pretty rough. Might be. There's a lot of production lost due to graduation and the portal, as well as the NFL draft. But I'll get to that here in a second. So let's do like a unit review. So when it comes to the offense was actually really good. Considering that Utah State is in the Mountain West, they don't attract elite talent like a BYU or Utah does. So and BYU and Utah don't even attract elite talent. They just attract talent. So Utah State was, like I said, in passing yards, 21st overall in the country. Rushing, they were also 21st overall with almost 200 yards a game. It was 199.3 with Rasul Faison just popping off last year. The defense, and Aggie fans, you know, points against. So points per game, let's go back to the offense really quick. Points per game, 31.9 was 38th in the country. So the offense was actually pretty gangbusters last year. If only Utah State had a defense. Outside of Ike Larson and Jordan Vincent, the two safeties, they didn't really have a defense. So let's take a peek there. The defense finished tied for 128th with 37.8 points per game allowed. 128th in the nation is next to last in the country. That's one of the reasons why I think Utah State went and hired Bronco, because Bronco has an illusion of being a defensive-minded head coach. I didn't really see it at BYU, didn't really see it at Virginia, but that's where he made his bones. Came up as a defensive coordinator, linebackers coach before that. So that's the illusion. I didn't really think he was at BYU. I didn't see it at Virginia, but, whatever. And as you can tell, I'm not the biggest Bronco fan. I'm not. But if you could just lower that points against down to like 29, which is almost a touchdown per game less, then you've really got something. You've got a Utah State team that could have been competing in the Mountain West Conference Championship game. Maybe even beaten Utah. So that's kind of the calculus that was going into what Utah State was looking at, their athletic director and all that stuff, for their next head coach hire. Because unfortunately, Nate Dreiling and every other coach on the staff was toxic, at least in the eyes of the leadership, and so they were wiped out. All right, so that's the head coaching staff. That's the unit review. What's the production that Utah State is losing? Well, pretty much everything. It's not a good sign heading into next year, and it's also a sign of the time. People and players will be looking at the Pac-12, Mountain West, the MAC, Conference USA, Sun Belt, the American Athletic Conference, and maybe the Big 12 if the Big 12 slips, as developmental leagues for the Big Three, which would be your SEC, Big 10, and ACC. ACC could slip below the Big 12 as well. Don't get it twisted. College football is hurtling towards two super conferences with everybody else left out if ESPN gets its way. That's where we're headed. Just keep an eye on that. Kyle Whittingham predicted it a couple of years ago that that's where it's going to head. Nick Saban has been saying the same thing. Kirby Smart has said the same thing. So guys who've been around for forever see the writing on the walls, and it would be naive and foolish of us to ignore their warning. So long as ESPN holds the keys to the kingdom, that's where we're headed. All right, so let's go back. What is Utah State losing? Well, they're losing Spencer Petras. He was always a one-year rental. He was always going to be gone after 1 year. 2,315 yards passing. Pretty decent season. He dealt with injuries as well as getting benched in a couple of games. 17 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Just ask Iowa Hawkeyes fans about how they feel about Spencer Petras, and Utah State fans will go, yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Overall, indifferent season from Spencer Petras. The guy that kind of popped off a little bit was Bryson Barnes. Bryson Barnes will be back next season. He didn't really throw the ball, but he was a willing and able runner who did it very well. Passing, he only threw for 856 yards, 12 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions. If you look at those stats, you go, all right, okay, not bad. But what he did running the ball, especially in the last 2 games of the season against Colorado State and San Diego State, he carried the ball 24 times against Colorado State for 185 yards and a touchdown. And then he also carried the ball 15 times against San Diego State for 193 yards and 1 touchdown. That's pretty good. And unfortunately, they don't trust him to throw the ball. Based off of the stats, though, I would have trusted him to throw the ball more so than I would have trusted Spencer Petras. That's my opinion. So going into next year, Bryson Barnes is the favorite to be the starting quarterback for Utah State. It'll be interesting to see what they do because it is not the same offensive coordinator. Jason Beck was the offensive coordinator at New Mexico for Dampier. They went to the University of Utah, and so we'll see what the offense looks like. Robert Anae, keep an eye on this. Robert Anae was let go at North Carolina State. Will we see a reunion between Bronco and Robert? Because they went with each other as a package deal from BYU to Virginia. And as a BYU fan, I said good riddance to bad rubbish. Virginia kind of felt the same way towards the end there. And North Carolina State, he was also the offensive coordinator up in Syracuse for a season. Robert Anae was. Didn't last very long there either. We'll see what happens. He might be hired on as a special assistant, anything like that, to, quote, help out with the offense, but it would not surprise me if eventually those two reunite. So keep an eye on that, Aggie fans. Now, let's go to the production lost. Overall, and this isn't everyone, these are just the major players from last season or guys that were expected to have a major impact for the team. Overall on defense, they are losing, just from the guys I pulled, 151 tackles, 6 passes defensed, 3 interceptions, and 3.5 sacks. Those guys are all leaving. What guys are those? Well, one is Blaine Spires, who went down after 4 games. He was expected to be a pass rush specialist for the Aggies. He transferred out to Pitt. He had 8 tackles and 1 sack. Max Alford, who in his first season had 44 tackles when he was a true freshman, was almost named to the freshman All-Mountain West team. He only had 2 tackles this season. He was injured after the very first game. Over the past 2 years, he's had injury issues. So he transfers to BYU, where he's going to be playing in a backup role to the big 3 that BYU have in their linebacking core. Who else are they losing on defense? Well, they're losing William Holmes as well. He had 6 tackles and 1.5 sacks. He was a freshman. He's transferring out. He hasn't named his destination yet, but he's gone. 51 tackles, 1 sack, 2 passes defense, one interception that was returned for a touchdown. Jaden Francois, he's a graduate transfer. He was never coming back anyway. He's going to Duke. DJ Graham, redshirt junior, 42 tackles, 2 passes defense, 2 interceptions. He was originally committed to Oklahoma, went to Utah State, and is now headed to Kansas. And then Jaden Pearson, a linebacker, he's also a graduate transfer. He started at Utah, so Utah Utes fans, if that name sounded kind of familiar, he was a special teams guy a couple years ago. He transferred to Utah State, got 42 tackles, he defended 2 passes. He's going to Fresno State, so Utah State will see him again. But again, he was a graduate transfer. So that's the defensive production that they're losing. That, again, that's not an exhaustive list, but that is the major players that I saw heading into the season as well as coming out on the other side. that they're losing on defense. So it's not an impossible amount of production to replace. They're not losing, team captains or anything like that. Ike Larson is going to the draft. He is going to be nearly impossible to replace. Like, how do you replace a guy that good? And I would say the same thing at Utah as well as at BYU. I would say the same thing. Jordan Vincent as well. Senior, he's gone. Over 100 tackles for him. He had an outstanding year. He had 4 interceptions. Just a really good player. He could be playing on Sundays as well. So they're losing their 2 safeties. Now, Ike Larson can't always come back for a senior season. That is very possible. If he were to ask me, which he wouldn't, because why would he? But if he were to ask me, I'd tell him to go pro. I think he's ready to go pro. I think he's that good. But he could go back for one more season under Bronco Mendenhall, or hit the transfer portal, maybe go to Utah, maybe go to, another Power 4 school. I would say go to Utah because Morgan Scalley pumps out defensive backs like nobody's business. So that's a lot of production as well, right? So that's 80 tackles and 1 interception for Mike Larson, 117 tackles and 4 interceptions from Jordan Vincent, added on to what I said there. So that's roughly 350 tackles that you're losing out on. 8 interceptions. That's a lot. And what is that? 14 passes defense. So that is a lot of production. Luckily for Utah State, they're going to be playing in the revamped Pac-12, which will be the Pac-7. Eventually the Pac-8. They should just change their name. I don't understand why these conferences stick with. Just change your name. You're not the Big 10 anymore. You have 16 teams. You're the Big 16. Southeastern Conference, you're not in the Southeast anymore. You got Oklahoma and Texas. And then the Big 12, you got 16 teams as well. You're the Big 16. So that's just another tangent I could go off on. But that's where we're sitting for the defense with Utah State. That's a lot of production gone. Now to the offense. The offense was always going to be a bloodbath as well because a lot of those guys were seniors. So, when we look at it, Spencer Petras gone, always a 1-year rental. Roswell Faison entered the transfer portal, and I wasn't surprised when I saw that. I saw that and I went, oh, that's too bad for Utah State. And the guy had 198 carries, 1,109 yards, 8 touchdowns. He also had 22 catches for 99 yards. He's so good that he's getting attention from Florida State and Alabama. He has had official visits to both schools. That's how good of a season he had. So, more power to him. They're also losing... They'll be getting back Robert Briggs, who is coming off that knee injury, so we'll see how he does. But they're also losing Grant Page and Otto Tia. So, Otto Tia is in the transfer portal. He has not said his destination, and it's not as public as Roswell Faison's is. So he hasn't really announced any visits or anything like that. But Grant Page had 33 catches, 281 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's transferring to Southern Miss, which had 1 win last year. I don't know. But Otto Tia, 44 catches, 434 yards, 7 touchdowns. Hasn't announced his destination. Another pass catcher, Will Monty, tight end, 11 catches, 138 yards, 1 touchdown. He's going to Oklahoma State. He looked at that passing game and went, oh boy, I want to be a part of that. I don't know. Overall, the offensive production lost just from the transfers, 110 catches for 952 yards and 10 touchdowns. And then obviously Roswell Faison's numbers for running the ball, 198 carries, 1,109 yards, 8 touchdowns. The offense is going to be a mess, I think, next year. They got Bryson Barnes at quarterback. Maybe there's something there that they can get rolling. They also have Jacob Conover, formerly of Arizona State and BYU. Maybe. I don't really see much there. And then receiving, Jalen Royals is already going to the NFL. He already declared it when he was out with injury. 55 catches, 834 yards, 6 touchdowns. Dude is going to be playing on Sundays. He's that good. So the offense will look a lot different next year, which is too bad because the offense was actually pretty fun to watch. They put up a lot of points, put up a lot of yards. They just couldn't stop anybody. Overall on the season, much better than I anticipated. They did a better job than I think anybody anticipated coming out of the mess that they had. Now they're going into Bronco Mendenhall and the different kind of mess that's going to bring. But like I said when the season started, get ready for a rough one. But at least the rough one was kind of entertaining to watch just because the amount of points that were going up in those games. So Aggie fans, I'd love to hear your opinion on it. You can comment on my video. I think you can comment on Spotify now. But you can also let me know on Facebook if what you think of the future, if you're as glum on the hire of Bronco as I am. I'd love to hear it. But overall, I give the season a C-. Just because of all of the junk that they had to go through right before the season started. And they still came out with 4 wins. That was 3 better than I thought. So that's the episode this week, everybody. Overall, a C- performance from Utah State. Next week, I'll be going over the University of Utah and the dumpster fire that season was. And my thoughts on it will be next week. So thank you all for being here. And I'll see you all next week when we spelunk back into the Matt Cave.